On a weathered park bench, a white police officer shares his lunch with a homeless black woman, ignoring the sneers of his fellow officers. Day after day, they sit together until one afternoon, he hands her a newspaper and notices the hesitation, the way her eyes skim the page without understanding. She can't read. Instead of walking away, he makes a choice others call foolish to teach her. What starts as a simple lesson will soon change both their lives in ways no one ever expected. Officer Daniel Carter adjusted his belt as he stepped out of the Brookford precinct, the early afternoon sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, cars honking impatiently, pedestrians moving with purpose, and the distant hum of construction. It was his lunch break, the 1 hour of the day when he could step away from the tension of his badge and simply observe the world as it moved around him. He made his way toward the small park near the station, a place he often went to clear his mind. With a sandwich in hand, he looked for a quiet bench when he spotted someone sitting alone near the entrance. A black woman, likely in her early 50s, sat on the edge of a weathered wooden bench. Her clothes were faded and frayed at the edges, a thick coat draped over her shoulders despite the warmth of the afternoon. Her face, darkened by sun and time, carried deep-lined stories untold, struggles endured. She wasn't begging, wasn't holding a cardboard sign like so many others downtown. Instead, she simply sat there, hands resting in her lap, posture upright, as if even in her circumstances she refused to let the world strip her of dignity. As Daniel walked past, their eyes met. She gave him a slight nod, a quiet acknowledgement. Not a plea for help, not an expectation, just a nod. He'd seen that look before, in veterans who had nothing left but pride, in mothers working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. It was the look of someone who had learned to expect nothing from the world but carried on anyway. Something about it made him stop. He turned back toward her, hesitating only a second before stepping closer. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty space beside her. The woman eyed him warily, then shrugged. "Public bench," she muttered. Daniel lowered himself onto the seat, unwrapped his sandwich, and after a brief pause, extended the other half toward her. "I've got more than I need," he said casually, as if it were no big deal. She glanced at the sandwich, then at him. "I don't take handouts," she said firmly. "It's not a handout," Daniel countered, taking a bite of his half. "I just don't like eating alone." There was a beat of silence between them. Then, with a slow exhale, she reached out and took the sandwich. "Guess I can help you out then," she murmured. They ate in silence for a few moments, the only sound the rustling of leaves overhead and the distant chatter of people passing through the park. Daniel didn't push conversation, he knew better. People who had lived through hard times didn't spill their stories just because someone asked. Trust was something earned, not requested. Eventually she broke the quiet. "You always share your lunch with strangers." Daniel smirked. "Only the ones who look like they could use a good meal." She gave him a sideways glance. "That's supposed to mean something." He shook his head, swallowing another bite. "No, just means I've seen people struggle, and I figure if I can make one part of their day easier, it's worth it." She studied him for a moment, then huffed. "You a cop?" Daniel nodded. "Brookford PD." She let out a humorless chuckle. "Well, ain't that something?" He raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" "Most cops I see don't sit down next to folks like me, unless they're looking to move us along," she said plainly, taking another bite of her sandwich. Daniel exhaled slowly. He knew she wasn't wrong. He'd seen it, officers treating the homeless like nuisances, sweeping them off sidewalks, breaking up makeshift camps, acting like they weren't people. Some of them justified it as keeping the streets clean. Others just didn't care. "I'm not most cops," he said simply. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if measuring whether or not to believe him. After a moment she nodded, as if filing the information away for later. "Name's Alma," she said. "Daniel," he replied. The conversation didn't go much further that day. They finished their food, exchanged a few more casual remarks, and then Daniel stood to leave. "I'm usually around here for lunch," he said before walking away. "If you ever feel like keeping me company again." Alma didn't respond right away, but just before he turned the corner, he caught a glimpse of her out of the corner of his eye watching him go, a hint of something thoughtful in her expression. He didn't know it yet, but that small moment, That simple act of sharing a meal would be the start of something neither of them could have ever expected. The next day, at precisely noon, Daniel found himself back in the park, sandwich in hand. He hadn't consciously planned it, at least. That's what he told himself, but something about yesterday's conversation lingered in his mind. Maybe it was the way Alma had looked at him, skeptical yet searching, as if testing whether he was just another officer saying the right words, or if he actually meant them. She was there, sitting in the same spot, her coat wrapped tightly around her, even though the midday sun was warm. She noticed him approaching, her expression unreadable. Daniel didn't ask to sit this time. He simply took his place beside her, unwrapping his sandwich like it was the most natural thing in the world. He placed a second one between them without a word. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, with a small shake of her head, she muttered, "You're persistent." "Huh?" He smirked. "I've been told." Alma let out a slow breath before reaching for the sandwich, turning it over in her hands as if she were still debating whether to accept it. But eventually she took a bite. They ate in comfortable silence, the same way they had the day before. This time, though, Alma spoke first. "Used to work down at the old shipping warehouse off Jefferson," she said, her voice even, like she was reciting facts rather than memories. 15 years. Good job. Hard work, but steady." Daniel wiped his hands on a napkin. "What happened?" "Company went under," she said simply. "No severance, no warning. Just locked doors one morning. A couple of us tried to fight it, but you know how that goes." She gave him a wry look. "Nobody cares when folks like me lose their jobs." Daniel didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Alma glanced down at her hands, the calluses still visible even after years of being out of work. Tried to find something else, but it's hard when you ain't got a fancy degree, when you're not qualified for anything but lifting boxes and working yourself to the bone. Her lips pressed together. Then the rent got too high. Then the bills stacked up. Next thing I knew, I was out here. Daniel studied her for a moment. She wasn't telling him this for sympathy. She wasn't trying to make him feel bad or ask for help. She was just stating the facts, laying them out as they were. "That's a raw deal," he said finally. She huffed. "Yeah, well, ain't like I'm special. Plenty of folks out here with worse stories." He nodded, knowing there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound empty. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "So, what do you do during the day, besides tolerate cops who won't leave you alone at lunch?" That got a small chuckle out of her. "Library, sometimes. They don't mind if you sit in there for a few hours. Better than the shelters." "Those places," she shook her head. "You ever been inside one?" He had. Not as a resident, but as a cop responding to calls, fights, overdoses, thefts. The shelters were overcrowded, dangerous. For a woman alone, they could be worse than the streets. "I get it," he said. She snorted. "No, you don't." Daniel didn't take offense. She was right. No matter how much he saw, how much he thought he understood, he would never know what it was like to live it. As if sensing she had pushed too far, Alma exhaled, her tone softening. "But I appreciate you pretending to." Daniel smirked, but before he could respond, a voice cut through the air. "Carter." He turned to see Officer Reed walking toward them, his uniform crisp, his expression amused but edged with something else, something sharper. Reed was one of those guys who had been on the force a little too long. The kind who believed his job was about keeping order, not understanding people. He stopped a few feet away, looking between Daniel and Alma with open skepticism. Didn't realize lunch breaks turned into charity work. Daniel felt Alma stiffen beside him. He kept his tone neutral, just having a meal. Reed let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Man, you always were the bleeding heart type. You know this isn't going to change anything, right? You sit here, share a sandwich, and what? She suddenly gets a house. Doubt it." Alma's jaw tightened, her hands clenching into fists on her lap, but she said nothing. She just stared ahead, like she had heard this kind of thing 1,000 times before. Daniel's own fingers curled against his knee. He wanted to snap back, to say something that would shut Reed down, but he knew guys like him didn't listen. They had already decided how the world worked, and nothing would change their minds. Instead, he took a slow breath and met Reed's gaze. "I don't do this because I think it's going to change the world," he said. I do it because it's the right thing to do." Reed scoffed. "Yeah? Well, good luck with that." He gave Alma a look that was half dismissive, half sneering. "See you around." And then he was gone. Alma let out a long breath, shaking her head. "Your friend's a real piece of work." "He's not my friend," Daniel muttered. Silence stretched between them for a beat. Then, without looking at him, Alma said, "Why do you really keep coming back?" Daniel thought about it, thought about giving her some easy answer, but instead, he just told the truth. "Because I don't want to be like him." Alma studied him then, her dark eyes searching his face, looking for cracks, for falsehoods. When she didn't find any, she nodded slowly. They finished their sandwiches in silence, but something between them had shifted. This wasn't just about lunch anymore. Days turned into weeks, and what had started as an occasional shared meal became routine. Every lunch break, Daniel showed up with 2 sandwiches, and every lunch break, Alma was there, waiting, though she never admitted it outright. Their conversations ranged from casual observations about the city to deeper discussions about the world and the way it worked, who it worked for, and who it left behind. Alma never sugarcoated things, never let Daniel feel too comfortable in his own good intentions. She challenged him, pushed him, forced him to see things through her eyes. And he listened. Then one afternoon, something shifted. Daniel had brought a newspaper with him, folding it under his arm as he set the sandwiches down. He figured Alma might find some of the articles interesting, something to break up the monotony of her days. He handed it to her mid-conversation, not thinking much of it. "There's a story in here about the old warehouse. Thought you might want to see how the city's screwing it up this time." Alma took the paper, fingers brushing over the edges. She stared at it for a long moment, then gave a short, forced chuckle. "Yeah," she murmured, "sure." She opened it, her eyes flicking over the print, and for a moment, Daniel didn't notice anything unusual. But then he saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the page too tightly, the way her gaze never settled on one spot for too long. She wasn't reading it. She was pretending to. Realization sank in like a slow weight in his chest. He didn't say anything at first, didn't want to embarrass her, but something told him she knew he had noticed. The paper lowered slightly in her hands, and without looking at him, she muttered, "You got something to say, officer?" Daniel hesitated. He could let it go, pretend he hadn't seen, but that felt like a lie. And if there was one thing he had learned about Alma, it was that she didn't respect lies. So he spoke carefully. "You never learned to read, did you?" For the first time in weeks, she looked uncomfortable. Her jaw tightened, and she let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Ain't that something?" she muttered, shaking her head. "White boy cop figures out the black homeless lady can't read. Bet you feel real proud of yourself." Her words were sharp, meant to push him away, to make him back off. But Daniel didn't flinch. He just watched her, waiting. Alma sighed, folding the newspaper carefully, deliberately before setting it aside. "Dropped out in middle school," she admitted finally. "Had to take care of my mama. Then life kept happening, and well, you don't need to read to work a loading dock. Didn't need it to survive. Until I did." Her fingers fidgeted against the fabric of her coat. "It's not like I never tried to learn, but you get older, people just assume you know how. You learn to fake it. Nod along, act like you understand. Most folks don't care enough to notice." Daniel did. He didn't pity her, he knew she wouldn't want that. He just saw her. Saw the weight she carried, the way she had to fight for things most people took for granted. And for the first time, he realized just how much the world had written her off. "Let me help you," he said. Alma scoffed. "With what?" "Teaching a 50-year-old woman her ABCs." He didn't smile, didn't make a joke. "With whatever you need." She studied him for a long time, searching for mockery, for condescension, for anything that might make this feel like another moment where someone was looking down on her. But there was none. Just patience. Just an offer. Alma exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face. "You don't quit, do you?" Daniel shook his head. "Not when something's worth it." Silence stretched between them. Then, with a slow nod, she murmured, "All right, officer. We'll see how long you last." It wasn't an acceptance. Not fully. but it was the closest thing to trust she'd given him yet. Daniel kept his promise. The next day he showed up not just with lunch, but with a book, a slim, well-worn paperback he had grabbed from his own shelf that morning. He set it down between them on the bench, next to the sandwiches, and watched as Alma eyed it with suspicion. She didn't touch it, didn't ask any questions, just chewed slowly, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she exhaled through her nose. "That's supposed to be for me." Daniel nodded. "Figured we could start small." Alma let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "And here I was hoping you'd forget." "I don't forget." She didn't look at him, just focused on her sandwich, chewing deliberately. "You ever teach anybody before?" "Nope." She snorted. "So what, you think just 'cause you're a cop you can do anything?" Daniel shrugged. "I figure if I can talk a guy down from waving a gun at me, I can handle a few reading lessons." That earned him a chuckle, but still she didn't reach for the book. Instead, she tapped her fingers on the bench, her body language tense, like she was wrestling with something. "You know," she said finally, "when you're a kid, not knowing how to read just means you fall behind in class. But when you're grown, not knowing how to read makes you invisible." She gestured vaguely at the world around them. "Can't fill out a job application. Can't read signs. Can't even tell if someone's trying to scam you." Her fingers curled into a fist, resting on her knee. "People just assume you're dumb. Like you ain't worth teaching." Daniel stayed quiet, letting her words settle. He could hear the anger beneath them, the frustration of years spent navigating a world that wasn't built for people like her. She wasn't asking for sympathy, and she damn sure wasn't asking to be saved. She was just telling him the truth. "You're not invisible," he said quietly. Alma glanced at him then, her expression unreadable. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the book, flipping through the pages as if testing its weight. Then she let out another long breath. "All right, officer. Let's see if you know what the hell you're doing." And so they started. It was slow going at first. Alma had picked up bits and pieces over the years, memorized words she saw often, but reading full sentences, stringing them together, recognizing sounds that was something else entirely. Daniel quickly realized that patience was the most important skill he could bring to the table. Alma got frustrated easily, and when she did, her defenses went up. She'd snap at him, mutter that this was pointless, that she was too old for this, that it was easier just to keep pretending. Daniel didn't argue with her when she got like that. He just waited, let the silence settle. Then he'd turn a page, point to a word, and say, "Let's try again." And every time, eventually, she did. Some days were better than others. Some days she made real progress, sounding out words, recognizing patterns, moving forward. Other days she slammed the book shut and refused to look at it, arms crossed tight over her chest. One afternoon, after an especially difficult session, she let out a sharp breath and shoved the book aside. "What the hell am I even doing this for?" she snapped. "Ain't like it's gonna change nothing. Ain't like a 50-year-old woman with no home and no job is gonna get some big opportunity just 'cause she can read a damn book." Daniel leaned back, resting his arms on the bench. "You're doing it because you deserve to," he said simply. Alma scoffed. "That's some feel-good bullshit." "Maybe." He turned his head to look at her. "But it's still true." She didn't say anything after that. But the next day, when he showed up with the book, she reached for it without hesitation. It became part of their routine. Lunch, a lesson, conversation. The more time Daniel spent with Alma, the more he realized how much she had adapted to survive in a world that never made room for her. She had ways of making it seem like she understood things when she didn't. If a sign had too many words, she'd pretend she just wasn't interested in reading it. If someone handed her paperwork, she'd say she left her glasses somewhere. People rarely questioned her. It was easier for them to believe she was careless than to consider the truth. One afternoon, a man stopped near their bench, middle-aged, wearing a button-down and slacks, the kind of guy who looked like he never went anywhere without a purpose. He glanced at Daniel, then at Alma, then back again, his brow furrowing. "Officer," he said, his tone carrying just a hint of disdain, "I don't mean to be rude, but shouldn't you be working?" Daniel didn't blink. "I am." The man huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Reading books with a bum in the park. That's what my tax dollars are paying for." Daniel felt Alma tense beside him, but she didn't look up. She just stared at the book in her lap, her fingers tightening around the edges. Daniel kept his voice calm even. "You a taxpayer?" The man straightened, clearly expecting some kind of argument. "Yeah." Daniel nodded. "Then you should be happy to know your taxes are going towards something that actually helps people." The man scoffed. "Helping? You think this is helping?" He gestured vaguely at Alma, his voice dropping in volume, as if speaking about her too loudly might make her contagious. "You really think a woman like that is going to turn her life around because of a few reading lessons?" Daniel's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, Alma spoke, her voice steady but sharp. "A woman like that?" she echoed. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward the man, pinning him with a stare that made him hesitate. "You mean a woman you don't know a damn thing about?" The man shifted uncomfortably, but Alma wasn't finished. She stood, taking a step toward him, the book still clutched in her hand. "Let me tell you something, mister," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've spent my whole life listening to people like you tell me what I can't do, what I won't do, what I'll never be. And you know what? I used to believe it. I really did." She lifted the book slightly. "But then this stubborn-ass cop decided he wasn't going to let me believe it anymore." The man blinked, looking at her for the first time as if actually seeing her. But before he could say anything, Alma shook her head and sat back down, flipping open the book. Daniel smirked. "I think that means we're done here." The man muttered something under his breath and walked away. Alma let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders. Some people love acting like they know the whole damn story. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes you get to prove 'em wrong." She looked at him then, eyes softer than usual. And for the first time since they started this, she smiled. Not a smirk, not a scoff, but a real, genuine smile. Then she jabbed a finger at the book. "All right, officer. Let's see if I can finish this damn page without messing up." Daniel grinned. "Let's do it." One afternoon, months after that first sandwich on the bench, Daniel watched as Alma ran her finger along a sentence in the book, her lips moving slightly before she spoke. Her voice was slow but steady, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying a weight he knew only she could understand. She didn't stumble, didn't pause in uncertainty. She reached the end of the passage, exhaled, and looked up. Daniel grinned. "You just read that whole damn thing without stopping." Alma blinked, as if she hadn't even realized it herself. She glanced back down at the page, then back at him. A slow smile crept onto her face, the kind that started small but grew into something unstoppable. Then, to his utter surprise, she let out a laugh, not the dry, cynical chuckle he was used to, but something full, rich, unguarded. It was the sound of something breaking free. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. Daniel clapped his hands together. "Hell yes, you will." Alma shook her head, still grinning, still processing. "I never thought." She trailed off, pressing her fingers to her forehead, the weight of the moment sinking in. "I ain't never thought I'd get this far." Daniel leaned back against the bench, watching her, letting her have the moment. He knew better than to say something like "I always knew you would." That wasn't what she needed. This was her victory, not his. It wasn't long before people started to notice. Word spread in quiet ways, first through the library, where Alma had started lingering longer, reading books on her own, no longer just pretending. Then through the shelters, where she corrected a woman who misread a sign on the wall. Eventually, someone from a local charity organization caught wind of her story and approached her. They wanted to help. Daniel had been the one to tell her about it. He had shown up to the park that day like always, but instead of a book, he held a neatly folded brochure. "What's that?" Alma had asked, eyeing it warily. Daniel held it out. "Joe bleeds. Some folks at the shelter reached out to an organization that helps people get back on their feet. They heard about you, about what you've been doing. They think you'd be a good fit for a position." Alma frowned, not taking it. "Ain't nobody want to hire me." Daniel smirked. "That's not what they said." She still didn't take the paper. "What kind of job?" "A grocery store over on 5th. They need someone to help with inventory, basic paperwork, logging shipments." He paused, watching her closely. "Stuff that requires reading." Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders tightened. He saw the hesitation, the battle playing out behind her eyes. "And what if I screw it up?" she muttered. Daniel folded his arms. "Alma, you just read an entire damn book. You think you can't handle a stock list?" She let out a slow breath, staring down at the pavement. He could tell she was trying not to let herself believe it, because believing meant risking disappointment. "Look," he said, his voice softer now. "You've already done the hardest part. You proved to yourself that you could do something people told you was impossible. This," he held up the brochure again, "this is just the next step." She still didn't move. So he went for the push. "I'll help you fill out the application," he said. "Hell, I'll even help you pick what to wear to the damn interview. But you gotta be the one to take it from there." Alma exhaled sharply. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she reached out and took the paper from his hands. She stared at it like it was something fragile, something dangerous, something she wasn't sure she was allowed to hold. Daniel waited. Finally, she whispered, "All right." It wasn't confident. It wasn't triumphant. But it was something. And that was enough. A week later, Alma stood in front of the small mirror in a shelter bathroom, smoothing out the creases in a second-hand blouse Daniel had helped her pick out. She had never been the type to fuss over appearances, but today she found herself adjusting the sleeves, pulling at the hem, trying to make sure everything sat just right. She barely recognized herself. When she stepped outside, Daniel was waiting by his car, leaning against the door like he hadn't just cleared his entire afternoon to make sure she got to the interview on time. "You look good," he said as she approached. She scoffed. "Don't start." They drove in silence most of the way. Alma was quieter than usual, her hands wringing in her lap. When they pulled up to the grocery store, she hesitated. "What if they say no?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Daniel put the car in park and turned to face her. "Then we find something else," he said simply. She swallowed, nodding, then reached for the door handle. Before she stepped out, she looked at him one last time. "You really think I can do this?" Daniel met her gaze. "I know you can." She nodded again, as if letting the words settle, then stepped out of the car. He watched as she squared her shoulders, took a breath, and walked toward the entrance. She didn't look back. An hour later, she did. She came out of the store with a stunned expression, gripping a piece of paper in her hands. When she reached the car, she just stood there, staring down at it, not speaking. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Alma?" She let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. "I got it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel let out a triumphant yell, slamming his hand against the steering wheel in celebration. Alma just stood there, blinking rapidly, as if she was still waiting for someone to take it back. "They hired me," she whispered, voice shaking. "I start Monday." Daniel grinned. "Damn right you do." She let out another laugh, but this time her eyes were glassy. She blinked quickly, clearing her throat. "Guess that means I owe you lunch, huh?" He smirked. "I'm holding you to that." And for the first time in years, Alma Harris had a job, a chance, a future. Because she had learned to believe in one. In the weeks after Alma started her job, her life took a turn she never thought possible. She had a steady paycheck, a small apartment above a corner store, and for the first time in years, a sense of stability. She no longer had to sleep on the streets, no longer had to pretend she understood words she couldn't read. She had changed her own life one step at a time. One day, as she sat with Daniel on their usual bench, she told him about an idea. "There are people out there like me," she said. "People who need someone to help them the way you helped me." With Daniel's support, Alma began volunteering at the local library, helping adults learn to read. At first it was just a few people, but word spread quickly. People from shelters, single parents, even young workers hoping for better opportunities came to her, looking for a second chance. Alma taught them with patience, with understanding, because she knew exactly how it felt to struggle. Meanwhile, Daniel's efforts didn't go unnoticed. His story how a police officer took time to teach a homeless woman to read caught the attention of local media. The city council honored him for his service. But when he stood before them, he pointed to Alma. "I didn't save her," he said. "She saved herself." Alma became a symbol of resilience in the community. She wasn't just someone who had been helped, she became someone who helped others. As her reading program grew, so did her confidence. She was invited to speak at events, to share her journey, to show others that change was possible. One afternoon, as she and Daniel sat on the bench, she smirked at him. "You know, I think I owe you lunch." He grinned. "Damn right you do." They walked off together, no longer just a cop and a homeless woman, but two people who had changed each other's lives. And that was the real story. That one small act of kindness could ripple outward, transforming not just one life, but an entire community. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.